So now we have our T-pose Mixamo character imported. And as you can see from the editing, it looks like it corrected my jacket. So I'm just going to go into edit mode and fix that right quick. Kind of sucks, but I mean, it happens. Totally did not see that coming, but like I said, it happens. So I'll just repeat the same process. This may not happen to you. I'm not entirely sure, but just a simple fix. So again, just kind of quickly box select, followed by the same loop select. And if you notice, the movements are a lot snappier because I'm on my main PC. So very happy about that. So we'll just do the same as before and just brush select everything. I don't have to work nearly as slowly, so I can just quickly go along this particular loop of vertices. I'm just selecting the same ones as before. It looks kind of weird with these little stick legs. And then we will unhide the pants. As you can see, it renamed everything as well, so I don't really appreciate that. Unfortunately, I have to rename everything as well. It's just however their export process goes, that's what it is, unfortunately. Again, maybe it won't happen to you, but it's possible something within the data is what makes it do that. So now that I have edited the jacket, it looks all right. It's a little wide, but that's fine. I'm not overly concerned. My main issue was making sure that it wasn't protruding through way too much. So I think that looks okay. It's a little big on him at the bottom, but it's not a huge ordeal. As for the helmet and jetpack, I edited those separately, and it wasn't really much to edit. As far as I just sometimes I prefer to modify assets outside of the main file to kind of keeps things moving smoothly. So the first one I will do is append the helmet. It's a little big, so I'm just going to scale it down. I started with 0.25, and that seems about right. So I'm just going to move it into position, bring it back a bit, and down. Nice. And I'm going to bring it into front view to make sure that the eyes are lined up properly with the helmet, and they are, so we're good to go there. So what I'm going to do is, after bringing it to front, I'm going to select the helmet, then shift select the armature, go into pose mode, and parent the helmet to the head bone. So we'll go ahead and test that out. Fantastic. Just do a couple of more movement tests to make sure it's all looking okay. So I'm going to jump out of pose mode. So now we can import the jetpack, which I also got from Thingiverse, which is in OBJ. And we will start with the nozzle because it came in two pieces. And now the jetpack. So as you can see, we only have one nozzle, so I'm just going to move this into place. Bring it down a little bit. And then we're going to set its origin to the cursor, which will allow us to go into the modifier tab and select the mirror modifier. And now we have two nozzles. So we're just going to take a look at that from a different angle and bring it in way more. And I'm happy with these results. I'm going to go ahead and apply this modifier. And next we will just shift select the main jetpack portion and Control J to join them together. Nice. So I'm going to scale it down to 0.1 to start, and then we will scale it a lot more because it's still too big. So another 0.1. And then I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees and then rotate it 180 degrees on the Z-axis. As you can see, it's still a bit too big, so I'm just going to bring it down a little more till it looks like it's a proper fit on his back. Take a look at this from another angle. That seems to be okay. Just going to bring it in. Now, I will say that I opted out of editing the harness. So with the jetpack selected, we're going to shift select the armature and then go into pose mode. I'm going to select spine 1 and parent the jetpack to that bone. So if we move, that is the main bone that moves it, and the bone just below it, which is spine, also moves the jetpack as well. So next I'll hide the armature and rename this to helmet. And I'll go ahead and just name everything again, since that's what has to be done as far as, or at least that's, just to keep things organized. And apologize if you have to do this again. I wasn't aware this was going to happen. It just kind of comes with the territory, unfortunately. So just a quick little renaming of all the objects. We can now move on to the next part of our process, which is working on the front piece. Now, this was a challenge, a big challenge. So we will start by adding a plane and scaling it down to 0.2. And then I'm going to bring it up to the chest portion area. Next, we will go into edit mode and Control R to loop cut, which I'm going to do 4 on the horizontal axis and then 4 on the vertical axis. Next, I'm going to further loop cuts by selecting the grid snap and then loop cutting just to get a small portion on either edge on the left and right side, and then we will repeat the same process for the top and bottom. This actually took a bit of time to get right, so I was grateful that the final product turned out so well. So now that we have our loop cuts, we'll back out of edit mode and go to the modifier tab, and we will select the subdivision surface modifier. We'll add another modifier, which will be a shrink wrap. Use the eyedropper tool to select the jacket and pull it up above the subdivision surface. We'll use a wrap mode of nearest vertex and above surface. You can see me editing the offset to a 0.02, but we're actually going to take it away here in a moment. So I'm going to scale it on the x-axis just a little bit. And I found that if I pull it forward on the y-axis, it actually gets rid of the overlap in the front here. And I did try scaling it up a little, which was not doing me any good. Which is why I ended up setting the offset back to 0. And then just through a little odd scaling with grid snap, I found that grabbing on the y-axis gave me much better results. So initially, the main concern was about getting the front part to match the front of the jacket perfectly. Then I realized that we really just want the front part to fit the shape of the front of the jacket fairly close because it itself has its own shape, right? So after essentially blindly grabbing it around from different axes, I found that grabbing it on the y-axis gave me the best results. And this is how we ended up with this shape. So after applying the shrink wrap modifier, I just pulled it forward. And as we can see, it matches fairly close to the front of the jacket. We're going to add one more modifier, which will be a solidify. Just take a look at it from a different angle here and mess with the thickness. So I have it set at a 0.06, and that looks really good. I'm very pleased with the results, so I'm just go ahead and pull it back. And rotate it just a bit so that it matches the angle of the jacket more, but also covers up that zipper that I deleted earlier. Then we'll just set it to smooth and take a look here. I'd say that looks fantastic. So now that I'm pleased with the results, I'll bump up the subdivision a little bit more just to get some more detail and smoothness for the front part. And I'm not going to apply the modifiers just yet. And that's just so if I need to make any changes, I can do so before it's essentially permanent. So next we're going to create the buttons. We will Shift A to add a UV sphere. Then go into edit mode and box select the bottom half and delete those faces, which as you can see, the cursor is still in the middle of the mesh, so we can just scale on the Z-axis to bring it down. And I'm just kind of guesstimating the height that I want for this button. Then I'm going to go into vertex mode and loop select the bottom vertices, extrude on the Z-axis, followed by M to center to cursor. Then we'll scale it down. Rotate it minus 90 degrees so that it's facing forward. And I'm going to scale on the Y-axis just to thicken it up a little bit. It seems just a bit too thin for a button. So I went with a scale of 1.2 on the Y-axis. Select the front piece and Shift S, cursor to selected, then select the button, followed by Shift S, selection to cursor. Then we will bring it forward a bit and grab it on the Z-axis so that we can move it into its center position. To make things easier on the editing process for bringing all these buttons in, because I didn't want to do it manually, we will add an array modifier. So first we're just going to guesstimate the distance we want between each button. I went with 2.3 to start. As you can see, modifying the Z factor does nothing because we need to apply the rotation. So we'll do that now. And after it's applied, we can see it's moving up and down a bit because what we're wanting is for the buttons to taper down just a hair. So I'm just going to set this to 5, bring these in a little bit. Seems like 4 was a better number. Yeah, so it's just a good amount of spacing between each button. We'll bump this up to 2.8 and bring this down to 0.2. Then we will Shift duplicate and just reverse the settings that we have from before. So instead of 2.8, it's minus 2.8, and we can keep the Z-axis at 0.2. So the final results for the buttons on the left side is a 2.8, and for the right side I went with a minus 2.9, and that's just based on how we're looking at it. It seems to be even on both sides. So I apologize for the bouncing around. It's just part of the process in wanting everything to match up exactly the way I wanted it. And now we just Shift duplicate and bring our second set of buttons down to the bottom of this front piece. And then we will bring the Z-axis up on both sides, which as you can see, I kept the distance the same on both sides, but I went with a 0.4 for the Z-axis on both. Don't worry, I know that it's away from the front part for now, but we will get to that later, so don't worry. We will go ahead and apply the modifiers for both the top and bottom buttons. And next, what I will do is select either side, doesn't really matter. We're going to go into edit mode, then wireframe, and select this middle button here and delete it. So because we only need one for the center. Obviously, I duplicated it for a reason, and so the end result was always going to be to delete one of the center ones. So we'll Control J this portion, followed by repeating the same process for the bottom. Edit mode, wireframe, select the center button, delete, back out of edit mode, select both sets on the bottom, and Control J to join. And there we have it. Now we're not done yet, so we still need to do the buttons for the side. So essentially what we're going to do is repeat the same process for the side buttons. So we'll go into edit mode and loop select this one. Then shift duplicate, jump back into solid mode so that we can see what we're doing. Go to the modifier tab and select the mirror modifier first. And we have it set for the x-axis. We will add another modifier, which will be array. We'll set the x factor to 0. We'll start with a z factor of 2.8. We'll bump up the count to 6. And as you can see, they're not close enough, so we're going to add a few more notches to the z factor. And I decided to bring it down to 3, which appears to be even. And pull the array up first, click apply. And we are going to keep the mirror modifier so that we can move the buttons into place on either side. So we'll go into edit mode, select this first button here, and just bring it over a bit on the x-axis. And we will repeat that same process for the remaining buttons. So pretty simple, just L to loop select and grab on the X to bring it over. And this top one, we just need to bring it over a little bit here. I think that looks really good. We will then apply our modifier and go back into edit mode so that we can select both of these bottom buttons here and delete them because they're no longer needed because the buttons that were placed are already there. So now we have all the buttons ready to go. I think that is pretty well lined up, and now we are ready to move on to the next part, which will be applying them to this front piece, which was most definitely a challenge and not my favorite part of this process at all, but I did figure out a way to make it work. So we're going to select all the buttons that we have and bring them forward a little bit, and finally Control J to join them up. At this point, I felt like the buttons weren't thick enough, so I decided to scale a little bit more on the y-axis just so that they protruded more and, a little more easily seen. I think they actually look better now than they did a moment ago. So not a requirement, but it's just something that I felt I needed to do for this particular look. Next, we're going to add a simple deform modifier. Instead of twist, we're going to select bend and set the axis to Z. Bring the angle down. So we're going to start at 25, though this will change. So I found that the best results are an angle of 30. And that's just so that it doesn't give me any trouble having to rotate them too much later on. Because, man, this was, as I said, a big challenge. So, and not a fun one. So now that they have the proper bend, I will set the transformation from global to normal, followed by adding a move gizmo so we can actually see what we're doing here. I will explain this first button here, and then you can then apply the same concept to the remaining buttons, which is essentially pulling them back, getting the back vertices of each button to at least touch a part of the jacket, and then manually rotating each one. It's not my favorite process, but it's what had to be done in order to get it to work properly. Though keep in mind that because you're working in normal transform mode, your axes are different. So we can see that Y is down, Z is forward, and X is left and right. Another way of assuring that I was fairly on track was to look at the back of the interface for the front piece of this jacket and just get a bit of overlap. So from this point on, I'm just going to speed up this part of the video because it's the same thing throughout each button. They all have different rotations and require their own transforms based on their angle. So sorry that it has to be done manually, but it is what it is. Great. So now that that part is finally done, and trust me, I did not have fun doing it, we'll go ahead and take a look at the jacket. And I think that this front portion looks fantastic. It is all lined up and it definitely looks like one solid piece. So now we can move on to the next process, which will be parenting the buttons and the front piece to the jacket.